Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another Critique of the Week. Thanks so much for joining me in our new studio. This is the office now, still in the Woodlands, Texas, but a house, pretty awesome house we're living in. And coming to you live, we still got boxes in the back, as you can see, still setting everything up. But we are here for Critique of the Week. Hope you guys had a great holiday. Let's see, who do we have? I wasn't sure if we'd have a short crew on hand today, because... let's see, who do we got here? Dick Westheimer's here, Dee Coleman, Nikki Fryer's here, Tara Meslick McMahon, Sharon Ferrante, Winston Moon, Hamet Malik is here, all the way from Australia, Dick Westheimer, I think I already said, Ali Rowland, Monica Dobo, Sharon Ferrante, Chelsea McClellan, Rose Lennard over in the UK, Deb T's here, CLAS, yeah, so with the week off, I always wonder, you get out of the routine of doing everything. But we had no internet. We were actually moving a week ago Friday. Katie did a great job filling up some of the bookshelves so they wouldn't be empty. But we're pretty much sort of getting settled in still. Let's see. Over on, I think I have to refresh the Facebook and see if we have any comments. Anybody's over here? Not yet, but whoever's watching, I appreciate it. Say hi if you want to. Now, this is a Critique of the Week, and what we do with the critique is what we always do. Every Friday afternoon, we look over some poems. These are poems that were submitted. If you go to rattle.com/critique, you can find out where to submit them. All you do is submit 2 poems like normal, except for the special Critique of the Week category. And when you do, you'll know eventually when we get to them, we'll go over your poems, talk about them, try to be as helpful as possible, say what works, what doesn't, anything that we can think of to share about these poems. It really helps to let people know how their poems are landing. Or as a writer, it's really good to know, what works, what's confusing, what's not confusing, things like that, suggestions for where to go. And that's what we're going to do on the Critique of the Week, as we always do. And we had a great crew of people who are wonderful critiquers at this point as well. And so we can really polish up and help you out with your poems. Now, the first poem, we're going to go through the oldest poems in the queue again. The oldest poem is August 11th, so we're looking at about 4 months ago. This poem was submitted by Jeffrey Ogochukwu from Nigeria. And let's dive in and see what we've got. No general questions. There is a slot for questions. If you have any questions, you can leave them there. Okay, this is the poem we're going to be looking at. First, sad memories of things that never happened. And I wonder, right away, I'm wondering about the that dropping the E in never. It's a choice to do that, and you wonder why we're making that choice, but maybe we'll find out. So here we go. Once again, this is sad memories of things that never happened. Let me get a little more. There we go. Okay. Sad memories of things that never happened. Remember when green was a glyph of places we made bad jokes about how us dying in our sleep would be a perfect farewell to the world? Blissful ignorance in our old days, we reveled in happiness without realizing it. A somber hue blankets our sight, imprinting scars of relinquished dreams, a jag of them whose breath was stolen in their sleep, taken by COVID's cruel hand. Everything we see is a mirage, not the truth. In the backdrop of a reshaped land, we choked on the metallic taste of despair, quivery breaths and tears for breakfast, a heavy air. We were bleeding hope in our green age, so intense we've become immune to happiness. The weight of regret's somber bite, the fateful night. That fateful night, think of the scars as a map of places where our smiles were slain, a fleeting glimpse of purest delight in the midst of this transient space, a memory forever etched in the tapestry of a night. I'd like to opt out of life if I could, for somewhere a long time ago I messed up. Now I'm living the wrong life. Reality blurs and nightmares amplify like a bad version of the life I'm supposed to have. All right, and so this is one of those poems, and you get poems a lot of things, times there are a lot of the same things to say about them. And in this one, it's just the vagueness of the storytelling. We don't really know what's going on. We don't know who, the only hint of anything like direct that we can sort of relate to, or not relate to, but understand what the story actually is. We talk about COVID a little bit, so that sort of puts in a time and place. But outside of that, it's hard to know what's. Let me see. know what's going on. So, so tell the actual story. And that's the part. And that means say who the characters are, what's going on. Exactly. Hemant Malik says melodrama and few details. And that's the problem. It's got the emotion. You can feel the emotion there, but you don't know the story. As Deb T said, it's general, lacks concrete details. That's what we need. Winston Munn puts it this way: it needs to be depersonalized, I think, says Winston. And that's another way to put it too. It's just to tell the actual story. So we can't know. Like, we as readers don't have any of the context. We have no idea what you're talking about. And so we have to know to appreciate and understand the poem and have an emotional connection to it. We need to know what the actual story is. So we'll go a little over that, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But so sad memories of things that never happened. So we know they're going to be sad memories, but they're things that never happened. So even if they were sad memories of things, that would be really vague. But these aren't even things. These are the things that didn't even happen. So we're so removed from any kind of specificity or what's actually going on. Remember when green was a glyph of places we made bad jokes about how us dying in our sleep would be a perfect farewell to the world. So here we made bad jokes. This is, and one of the things we talk about is, sometimes poems are private instead of public, and there's nothing wrong with that, but to share it publicly with people that are strangers, you have to give the context. And so maybe somebody knows who the we is, like the person you're talking to knows, but we don't. Us readers don't know who we is. So that we made bad jokes about us dying, like who's the we? And you can do that by putting, sad memories I had with Bill about things that never happened, or whoever it is. You can add that in the title. You can describe it a little more here, but do something to help us know what's actually going on. Rose Leonard says, clearly there's intense emotion there for the poet, and I'm guessing they are using poetry as a way to explore those feelings so that that may hopefully serve a purpose. Yeah. And so there's nothing wrong with a private poem. It's one of the things I really want to emphasize every time we talk about this topic. Poetry does work for you, for yourself. There's a special way getting into that mode, that creative energy, that special space where things are sort of surprising as they come out. You're in this sort of flow state. You can come into insights about yourself about that are really, actually on a real psychological level that can be empirically examined. That's a really beneficial thing to be able to do. It's a kind of self-therapy that really works. It helps you understand your life and your narrative, and you don't have to share poems to make them valuable. And so in this case, we don't know who the we is, we don't know what's going on, but it could be working out those emotions, which is a good thing. It's just, if you're going to share it and have us feel those emotions too, that would help. So, and as Dick Westheimer says, the title would work if the title, was super concrete, something that we could know, then we could get into the poem that way. Anyway, so blissful ignorance in our old days. We don't know who the R is. We reveled in happiness without realizing. We don't know who we is, and so we can't connect to the poem. Even if it just said, my friends back home or something, we get a sense of who you were talking about, who the we was. But we don't. It assumes that we know. A somber hue blankets our sight, imprinting scars of relinquished dreams and a jag of them whose breath was stolen in their sleep, taken by COVID's cruel hand. So some people died of COVID. We know that. Everything we see is a mirage, not the truth. But we don't know who the we is. We don't know what we're actually seeing. We don't know what the mirage is. Like, what's it a mirage of? Describe that. In the backdrop of a reshaped land. And so what's the land and why it's reshaped? See, there are all these questions because we're being really general and not being specific about what's going on, so we don't get the story. We choked on the metallic taste of despair. And again, without the context, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Quivery breaths and tears for breakfast, a heavy air. We were bleeding hope in our green age. So the green age, points to a youth, so that's a little bit. So intense we've become immune to happiness. And so if we knew the context, there would be a lot of stuff to go on here. The weight of regret, somber bite. So what is regretted? You see how, there's just all these vague things that just raise questions and don't give us the answers. Okay. Yeah. Brian O'Sullivan said too, and I mentioned it briefly, that apostrophe I'm not sure what it's there for, and reading the poem through, it doesn't do anything either. So just spell things out unless that's a convention in poems when back in the day, sometimes you would drop a syllable in strictly metered poems to show that it was sort of a shortened syllable, so it would fit the meter count, and you'd feel the rhythm, and you'd do an apostrophe to take the place of a vowel there. Contract things that aren't really contractions. So it's like never, and it's like one beat, but this isn't that kind of poem. So that doesn't really make sense there. Anyway, so be specific, tell the story. We actually want to hear your story. That's really what we're here for, is to listen. And we wouldn't be reading, nobody would be reading your poem if we didn't want to hear the story. We do want to know the story. And so don't be afraid to tell us the story. Let's take a look at the other poem and see if it has the same kind of issues. Malfunctioning gearbox. Her laughter brings you to a place where the past doesn't kill you, broken and perfect like a malfunctioning gearbox. What will you do with all that happiness when it is given, if it is given? On the cusp of summer, hope returns in the form of a girl and pierces your leather-thick skin when you weren't looking. You watch the sea through her eyes. You watch with your eyes closed. A lot is said, but your tongue doesn't move. Sure enough, you do not know what to do or what do with all that happiness. There's so much desperation in your smile. Everything is in the eyes. If you watch closely in her eyes, they tell you she can never be yours. So here's a poem of longing, malfunctioning gearbox. Interestingly, when we talk about things that are concrete, a malfunctioning gearbox is pretty concrete. And one of the things that I like to do and recommend doing is, if you're going to use malfunctioning gearbox as a metaphor for what's going on in the poem, look up the details of a gearbox. Go to Wikipedia or wherever, learn a manual, whatever you can find to explain the details, and then dive deeper into that metaphor using like the little intricate parts of the gearbox. If it's a malfunctioning gearbox, how would laughter correspond to that? Like laughter is when, I don't even know how a gearbox works. I guess are there like actual gears? I assume. But anyway, the way they grind, the little teeth, all those things at the clutch plate. Is there a clutch plate? I don't know. I'm not a mechanic type. Just going through all the things in my cars over the years that have broken. But you can actually dive literally into that gearbox and use the details of a gearbox to bring the poem to life. Taylor H. Loss says the same thing. I'd love more description of his gearbox, especially the sound of it. Yeah, exactly. Broken and perfect like a malfunctioning gearbox. And again, the best line is malfunctioning gearbox. It's the most concrete, that you can see why that line, it sticks in your memory. It's a very, very real, tangible thing. And so, we don't want to have it both places and that be the highlight of the poem. Maybe think of a different title, but dive into that metaphor. On the cusp of summer, hope returns in the form of a girl. Now we're starting to get to why the happiness is this malfunctioning gearbox, because it's a love forlorn kind of poem. On the cusp of summer, hope returns in the form of a girl and pierces your leather-thick skin when you weren't looking. So again, piercing your leather-thick skin, stay with the gearbox. Like what, if you, I don't know, I guess you don't throw a rod in a gearbox. If some kind of way that a gearbox breaks, use that, like puncturing something, something twisted, some spring lost. I don't know. Use those kind of metaphors because you have that detail there. You watch through the sea through her eyes. You watch with your eyes closed. So now we're to the sea. We started at the gearbox. We went to this leather-thick skin, and then we go to the sea. And there's no real continuity between those either. So, focusing on that. Let's see. Yeah, Hemet says, yes, I wanted some clunking or stuckiness or grinding. Yeah, more cogs and ball bearings. Those are some things. Those are words. Thanks, Rose. Rose has more experience with gearboxes than I do. Cogs and ball bearings. Yeah, we want those in there. D. Coleman says the poet does reveal more of a story here, but still could use more details. Yeah. All right, and so that's it. So more details, tell the story. And that's just your poems will start to take off because the emotion is there. We feel the emotion, we just don't know where to put it. And because we don't know where to put it, we can't connect. Like we don't have to have your experience in a way that we relate to it. We have to be given your experience through the poem, which means explaining things, describing things, providing the context in really precise detail. So we get to forget that we are ourselves for a moment. We're you, and we feel that Yeah, Dick says, I'm a prime mark for a crooked mechanic. Yeah, well, that's true. Well, actually, in Wrightwood, back when we living there, I was friends with the mechanics, so they just took care of everything. If they said something was wrong, it was great. It's a small town. It's wonderful. Here in the Woodlands, Texas, I don't know what I'm going to do if I need a mechanic, but we have a Tesla, so we just go to the Tesla place, which is more like a robotics lab when you take the car in. Anyway, okay. So let's move on to another poem. But thanks for sharing that. Once again, the poet was Jeffrey Ogachukwu from Nigeria. Thanks for sharing that, Jeffrey. And next, let's go to Shay Sanchez from Ohio. Let's see. General questions. Here's some general questions from Shay. What is the tone and how does the tone shape your experience of the poem? Please speak to how structure form of the poem strengthens or weakens the experience of the poem. Where are the places in the poem that do not contribute to the overall theme? Where is it confusing or misleading? So these are general things, what we do every time. What feelings or questions are you left with after reading the poem? All right, so I think we have two poems here, Memento Mori and Middle Aging. Let's see, and these look about pretty short poems. Always appreciated for the critique of the week, though we can do longer poems too. All right, Memento Mori. And that's one of those phrases is it like an object of memory, or is it more to it than that? Remember you must die. That's right. Okay. Yeah, Memento Mori means remember you must die. Okay. So Memento Mori. Let's talk about flowers and remember that we will die. This year's buds are not the same as last year's, not the same wind that bends trees to moan into song, not the same ripples that drink the late morning light that let the current bury the rest. Each spring, new greens brighten the ends of older ones, as if to say, see how alive I am. The ocean swallows what the earth gives. In return, the earth gives breath to what will carry us over and over until his breath has nothing to come back to. Every chance she gets, PT comes back from her forage to my standing body, still and unwavering as an age-old tree. Sorry, I need a drink. Got a tickle in my throat. Anyway, every chance she gets, PT comes back from her forge to my standing body. Still and unwavering as an age-old tree, she rubs her horned head against my hip, against my back, against the memories of her kids, gone and let gone. I rub my hand against the softness of her belly, moon round as my mother's, her mother's mothers. I trace the circles their lives have drawn, discs with radiating florets of family names that dive deep into a shared history. Asterachia, Liliakia, I hope I'm saying that right, Lamiakia, or Lamake, I guess you guys say Lamiake, is that how you'd say it? Iridicae, yeah. I rest a hand on my belly and remember, not all bodies are made the same. With my empty hand, I cup a pink bee balm. Breathe everything in. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, Rose Larson says I like the first line. Let's talk about flowers and remember that we will die. So that's nice. So I like the poems. I think the poem, this is one of those examples of a poem to me where it was sort of spinning its wheels in sort of cliche type topic, talking about death through the spring and how that repeats. It's sort of a traditional poem type topic. And it starts out in this general way, and I think lingers on there too long. Yeah, Deb T says nice rhythm and flow to the language. It's a bit long-winded for me. Yeah. And so and it feels like it lingers on this stuff that's really, sort of, it could be John Donne talking about leaves or, Nothing Gold Can Stay is a 150-year-old poem at this point, almost. And so, so this topic at the beginning is sort of trite sort of convention. But then, and I wonder why not start like here. Every chance she gets, PT comes back from her forage to my standing body. Like we get, so this feels like a lot of times there's a sort of a runway to a poem where you're sort of getting in, you don't really know what you're writing about, you haven't let that subconscious part of your creativity taken over. And then all of a sudden the poem starts to take off and it sort of goes its own direction. And you can feel when that does. And a lot of times it's when the specificity comes in, like we were talking about before, and surprising things start being added to the poem. And yeah. And as D. Coleman says, needs tightening really catches my interest with PT. Yeah. So here's where the poem starts to take off. And maybe instead of Memento Mori, what if this was the title? Let's talk about flowers and remember that we die. And then we just jump in with every chance she gets, PT comes back. From her forage to my standing body, still and unwavering as an age-old tree. See how the details, still and unwavering as an age-old tree. The rhythm really comes to life once we get into this section where it's sort of flowing, where it's sort of spontaneously coming out in a natural musical way. There's some nice lines up here, but there's sort of a slowness and a stiffness to it that sort of breaks free with at the end, and then the details come in too. So an age-old tree is not something that really appears up here. These are much more general, and so really the poem takes off. Anyway, every chance she gets, PT comes back from her forage to my standing body, still and unwavering as an age-old tree. She rubs her horned head against my hip, against my back, against the memories of her kids gone and let gone. And so I'm really wondering what PT is with a horned head. It's interesting, but there's a great rhythm to that, and the scene's starting to emerge right there. I rub my hand against the softness of her belly, moon round as my mother's, her mother's, her mother's mother's. I trace the circles their lives have drawn, discs with radiating florets of family names that dive deep into a shared history. I still don't know how to pronounce those Latinate words there. Is anybody helping me? Let me see. Yeah, so Deb T said hornheads and kid told me goat. Yeah, exactly. That's where we get eventually. Her mother's mother's. I trace the circles their lives have drawn, discs radiating florets of family names that dive deep into shared history. Asterake, Liliaque, Limiaque, Iridiaque. One of the things about words, and I don't know, do most people know how Asteraceae. Okay, thanks. So I knew somebody would know it. So Rose Larned says Asteraceae, something like that. So when you use, it's sort of like when you have words that you don't know how to pronounce, you can sort of guess a couple times and just sort of go with the flow, and it's fine as you're reading to yourself. But if there's a whole bunch in a row, it starts to bog you down. And I think, And so, Liliaceae. Liliaceae. Thanks, Rose. Yeah, and so if you don't know how to pronounce them, you start to get bogged down with the fact that you're not really pronouncing these, and you lose the music of the poem. And so with those things that people haven't seen before that are Latinate, difficult words to even pronounce, if you don't know a word that's pronounced like it spells, you can just sort of guess and go along with it. But if it's something that you don't even know how to pronounce and guess at, there's really a lot less patience that a reader has for those words. And so having a string of those 4 in a row is a really big ask for a reader. And so I would think about cutting back that. I rest a hand on my belly to remember not all bodies are made the same. With my empty hand, I cup a pink bee balm, breathe everything in. And so that's the end of the poem. And to me, the poem hasn't really gone anywhere, but it started here. And so what we want to know is more of the story. I guess that's the theme for today. Themes always seem to emerge. The story starts to take off with PT. We find our interest there. We're interested in that. But tell us more. Tell us the background. Like, that's a place where instead of ending the poem here, we haven't really gotten to like the reason why the poem had to exist. There's a reason why it was trying to emerge out of you. Like, you were telling the story for a reason. The reason hasn't really gotten to us. So we sort of set it up. See where it goes. Like, push this poem farther. That's what I would do. Cut the first half or first third or whatever this is, and then push farther. Rose Rosenar says they're names of families of flowers going back to the first line. Yeah. I mean, it's not what they are. The thing is, having trouble pronouncing them really breaks the music of the poem. And I don't know what percentage of people would know how to pronounce those. But I don't know, maybe 20% of people know just how to pronounce those because they are flower, gardener type people. But everybody else sort of stumbles and trips over words like that, and that throws you out of the poem. Divine Starling says, "Oh, I get it. She doesn't have children, empty hand, round belly. Not all bodies are the same." And Hammett says, "Loss of a baby." And like those things are hinted at, and so we're starting to get this sort of sense of the context in the story by the end. But it hasn't really revealed itself. It hasn't really gone somewhere that surprises you. I think someone earlier said that it hasn't really, there's no sense of self-discovery, I think is how they put it. And I think, and that's the thing. So it's sort of set up this story that you got to catch our interest first. And this catches our interest, but then it needs a reason for being. And I don't think we've found the reason. And if there's a reason that your mind went to this spot, but we don't really have it revealed yet. There are hints at having to do with, not having, families and lineages and fertility and things like that, but we don't really know the story. And I think this is a good spot to jump in and take a big turn in the poem, to surprise us by where it goes, tell a different story. Go back to the Poetry Space episode on braided poems, braids. How could you weave in a different story with this poem and intermingle it and go somewhere surprising, go somewhere different? Maybe tell us where Sweet PK or PT, what was the name? Yeah, PT, where PT came from. I mean, tell us that origin story. You can take us to something else completely different that's tangentially related and put them together. But that's a time to go somewhere surprising and not end the poem. Let's see. Mark Grenier says, there seems to be both human presence here and an animal, but the distinction between is unclear. Yeah, that's a good thing, too, I wanted to point out. So thanks for bringing that up, Mark. There is this, she rubs her horn head against my hip, against my back, against the memories of her kids, gone and let gone. I rub my hand against the softness of her belly, moon round as her mother's, her mother's, her mother's mothers. I trace circles their lives have drawn, discs with radiating florets of family names that dive deep into shared history. I have to hand on my belly and remember. Oh no, I guess I was confused the first time I read it, but I think it's clear now that she's just, she's a human, and it's a goat she's talking to. With my empty hand, I cup a pink bee balm, breathe everything in, and then can you feel how there's like, if I say this, with my empty hand, I cup a pink bee balm, breathe everything in, and the blah 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 blah. There's like this wanting to be more. There's like the sound is like held back and is like waiting to keep flowing, and then it doesn't. Like the poem's just not over yet. You can feel that the rhythm of the poem wants to keep going, but we stopped. And so keep going and tell more of the story. Okay. Taylor H. Law says, I love moon round as her mother's. Yeah, I like that. I really love that section too. I rub my hand against the softness of her belly. I calling it, not just her belly, but the softness of her belly. Moon round is my mother's, her mother's, her mother's mother's. There's that like lingering, and that's the way thoughts kind of emerge too, which is nice. You think of that, but then you think of one step farther and one step farther in this little train, and so it follows your sort of thought patterns too, which is nice. So tell us more about this. Okay, let's take a look at the other poem. Middle aging in the hot summer. Want is a lonely place. Want is a mirror in your hand. Want is the writing on the wall. You are a citizen of want. Want is a sore inside a city's throat. There is no other place but want. But what is want without loss? Want is the morning bird hiding in trees. You can't help but want to belong to want. Want is the sunlight fading into your hue. Can you ever let go of want? To discover want, be free of it. Want is a flower growing in the cracks. At the end of the day, want showers you like rain. So that's very nice. I think this poem, of all the poems we've seen so far today, this is the closest to like a finished product type poem. I like the way that the repetition of want in the way that changes the way you think about want and sort of personifying it and making it feel more concrete than just a sort of intangible sort of emotion. I think that aspect of the poem is really nice. I think there's some things that get a little bit repetitive, and instead of going to a surprising place, they sort of repeat themselves. So I'd scale that back a little bit. And there's some spots for me that ask to be described a little more in more detail, and we can sort of dive in and not let it hang with one line. This is a poem where all the lines, which is unusual, all the lines end in a hard stop. Each line is a full sentence. And I think we could extend some of these to break it a little bit more. Roselander's sonnet, I think it is 14 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah. So it is 14 lines. So a very, very loose sonnet shape. And maybe a volta-like thing down here. So that's part of it's nice. So let's see what I would cut and what I would expand on is the thing, and that would be the polishing of the poem for me. Middle aging in the hot summer, and I like the way that because we don't, it's a leap from where the title is to what we go. It's like it's sort of related. There's like a Venn diagram. They sort of overlap in some way, but it's like a different sort of tact, which makes for a nice title. It tells us what the poem is about, but it makes it more specific what the poem is about, and yet, it's a little different too. Yeah. So want is a lonely place. Want is a mirror in your hand. So that's very nice. And that want is a mirror in your hand. Want is the writing on the wall. The writing on the wall is a bit cliche. So come up with something that's not cliched there than writing on the wall. You are a citizen of want. I like that line too, the directness of that. There's a confidence that good poems have to say something like, you are a citizen of want, like you are this. Never be afraid to be confident. That's what famously, as he was editing The Wasteland, Ezra Pound said, perhaps be damned. Like, don't say perhaps. Don't be hesitant with poems. Like, you're the director, you're the producer, you're the god of this poem. And so you can tell us you are a citizen of want, and then we are a citizen of want. That's the power you have as a poet, and use that power. Make us a citizen of want. So it's really nice when you have really blunt statements like that are said confidently. You are a citizen of want. So that's very nice. Want is a sore inside a city's throat. And that's a really nice description too. Want, a sore inside a city's throat. There's really nice music to that. Again, there's a lot of confidence to the way that line's presented, and it's an interesting image. Not like the writing on the wall, but a sore inside a city's throat. That's very memorable. There is no other place but want. And so that one doesn't really do anything. There is no other place but want. Doesn't really add much in sort of, it's sort of repetitive. It doesn't. That's one of those lines that it didn't add something like the sore inside a city's throat. But it also didn't introduce a new concept either. So there's like nothing really added with that line. But what is want without loss is a kind of transition. So that one works. Want is the morning bird hiding in the trees. That's really nice too. That the specificity of that, the concrete feel of that. And that's one of those lines to me I could feel. You get the sense of like where things, there's like little holes in poems. You can add stuff, like little cupboards underneath, if you have a desk, there's a certain number of drawers and you're like, oh, this drawer is empty. There's that feeling of like an empty drawer at the end of that line. Want is the morning bird hiding in the trees. Its feathers, or just describe it hiding in the trees. Like add more to that description. Make that poem come to life even more. Make that line come to life even more by going into the detail about those birds hiding in the trees or what they're doing. Are they looking for food? Are they hiding from predators? Think of the places you can go, because in the rhythm and the music of the poem, there's a gap right there that wants to be filled with something. And so go into more detail. Like you've got us hooked, like a fish on the line, like reel us in a little bit with some more extension of that, because that's a really nice line. You can't help but want to belong to want. I think that's a weaker one too, similar to there's no other place but want. So I'd cut that or change that, make it more interesting. Want is the sunlight fading into your hue. That one is interesting, and it's precise and unusual. I'm having trouble really seeing that one. It's not as good as the other lines, but it's interesting. Can you ever let go of want? And I think that one is a nice one, because again, the bluntness. If you're going to be blunt and direct, it really works. To be vague, if you're like confident with it, if you're sort of fishing around and then it doesn't work as much. To discover want, be free of it. Here I wonder. If we could add more detail and say like someone specific, said this or something, or take us to a place with this? We can make this a quote somehow? I don't know. Want is a flower growing in the cracks. So that's a bit of a cliched line. It's not as good as a sword inside the city's throat. It's not quite as cliche as writing on the wall, but it's, a flower growing in the cracks is something you see a lot. It's a trite kind of image. At the end of the day, want showers you like rain. Yeah. And so I like that line. So I like a lot of this poem. I love the way want is repeated, and it gets a life of its own. It's an amorphous emotion, but it becomes sort of a more real through the poem. And I think it's a great, great structure for a poem, and there's really some feeling behind that. Yeah. Let's see. Hammett says menopause, and that could be something to do with it. Yeah, Chelsea McClellan says, I actually like the idea there's no other place but want. We're always in it. Yeah, it's not the concept that I don't like there. I want to be clear about that. It's the way that it mirrors, but there is no other place but want. It's sort of saying it the same, it's so similar that it ends up sort of being muddled in the thing. Because it's sort of repeating it, it's sort of a blandness in the tapestry of what this poem is. And so it gets lost. And what's a good concept sort of gets lost in the lines, if that makes sense. And so if we cut this, maybe say this a little more directly. If it was just you want to belong. Wait, which one was the line? Yeah. Where'd it go? Well, anyway. Winston Munn says, might end it with, to discover want, be free of it. The only hypotactic sentence. I don't know what hypotactic means. Hypotactic or hypotactic. Hypotactic. And that is a hypotaxis, I don't know, is a grammatical structure that arranges clauses in a sentence so that some are subordinate to others. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's funny because I'd never noticed that word before, and I was just reading James Longenbach's book. I can't remember what it's called. It's a craft book, a book of essays on poetry, and he was talking about that. I've never heard of that before, even though he was my professor. I guess the intro level freshman poetry didn't cover hypotaxis. Yeah. Let's see. Brandon Sutherland says, since it does seem like want is personified or at least made into a realm, would it make sense to capitalize want? And I think that doesn't, I wouldn't do that. I would keep it like this because that sort of, it's too on the nose. It makes too big of a thing about itself. And I think it's much better to gradually grow into the want, having sort of an embodied concrete feel to it. I think it works better just by using want over and over again through repetition and starting to you get to know want in this more intimate way that you never had before. And so I think this is a really great poem. And I think it's a good length even for it. I think it's just some of the lines are weaker and some could be fleshed out a little in more detail. And if you just made a couple tweaks to those things, I think it'd be a great poem. There's enough ambiguity too. There's some talk about menopause. Is it about menopause? It's middle aging and hot summer. So there's some sort of, there's an ambiguity about what it's directly about. But with enough concrete specificity that we're interested in pondering that. There's some poems where there's an ambiguity that's really fun to sort of daydream about. And there's other ways that there's an ambiguity. If it's about the actual context and what we need to know and what is it actually saying, then we don't like that. And so there's a good ambiguity, there's a bad ambiguity. This has good ambiguity, I think. We can sort of imagine it, see what the poet's really thinking about and sort of daydream based on the poem. So I like that aspect of it too. All right. Anyway, so this is a really close poem. I think a few edits. I think it's the right length. I think play with some of the lines, but otherwise it's a really good poem. Again, this is Shay Sanchez from Ohio. It sounds like Dick Westheimer or some others might know Shay. So nice. Okay. So let's take a look at another poem. And next up, we will go to Juliet Eliazu. From Nigeria again. Okay. And so this is another poet from Nigeria. General questions. Oh, we forgot the general questions. I sort of glossed over those. Was there anything specific? They're talking about tone. Shay was. The general questions for this last were, again, what is the tone, and how does the tone shape your experience of the poem? I'm not really sure what tone means, when it comes to poetry, to be honest. So, there's sort of registers of speaking. There's sort of a level of fluidity. There's a sort of different kinds of music. I don't know, tone. I'm not really sure what that means, to be honest. Yeah. And then talking about the structure and form of the poem. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, okay. So let's move on to the next part. We sort of covered a lot of that. The tone, I'm not sure. So what do you think? Everybody out there, when you hear about, what do you think of the tone of the poem? I mean, I guess I would say, as far as the tone goes, that's part of a voice. It's the sort of the emotional element of a voice is the tone. And so there's different kinds of tone to a poem. And as long as it has a tone that feels consistent and like it's coming from some specific person, that's the kind of poem that comes to life. And so I guess consistency of tone is what matters, that it has a tone and that the tone feels like somebody's, I guess it goes along the lines with what we say about, imagine the poem as something actually spoken from an actual person to another actual person, and that will have, depending on the poem and the content, like a certain emotional vibe, as D. Coleman's saying. And as long as that fits and it feels authentic, it's part of the authenticity of a poem, I guess. So that's what it is. Okay. Let's take a look at the next poem and poet. And next up, as I said, it's Juliet Iliazu from Nigeria. And how does the poem use the concept of twilight to explore the idea of transformation between day and night? In what ways do the celestial elements in the poem contribute to its overall mood and atmosphere? And how does the poem's imagery of stars and moon enhance the themes of silence and reflection? So I think right off the bat, even just by going by those questions, I think there's too much of a preconceived notion put on this poem. Like, you don't really write, it's not good advice or not a way to think about the crafting of a poem, the creation of a poem, the creation of meaning through the music of speech, which is what a poem is. Having like elements being mixed like it's sort of a baking recipe or something, or a stew like that, and you need some of this and some of this, and then it, that's sort of like what in middle school or high school is like dissecting a poem and sort of making meaning of it after the fact. But that's not really art. That's something different. And so what you really want to do is start up a musical voice. You get the music of a voice and then see what it has to say. That's the better way to think about a poem. So don't think about like how elements combine and emerge or merge together like you're adding different ingredients. Think about, this is the starting place and where can this take me? Like if I'm following, like I'm hacking through some path in the wilderness, where is this taking me? That's what, it's a sense of discovery, not like a I don't know, like you're mixing something in a cauldron. So right off the bat, I think that, so tell us a story and see what what emerges from the storytelling. Let's see. So I'm going to do, okay, let's see this poem. And this is pasted into the body of the email or the submittable. Let me shrink the line so we can see it properly. Okay. Twilight murmurs. In twilight's serene embrace, where shadows softly merge and intertwine, the day's last echoes like whispers on the breeze gently surge into the night. Stars ignite with a muted glow, their light casting delicate patterns upon the sky, sketching the contours of the evening's face as the world begins its nocturnal sigh. The moon, a solitary guardian, ascends in its celestial flight, casting its watchful gaze upon the diminishing light of day. And you can see the poem just sort of goes on like that, like what I was saying for it. So this is an example of what I was imagined it would be, which are not a sense of storytelling, a sense of I'm going to surprise myself and see where this goes, but instead, I'm going to put all these elements together into a poem and try to figure out what's going to happen. And I think that's not the right way to go about the composition of a poem. And so how are you going to surprise yourself? Yeah, is a thing. And so where is the you? Where is the speaker? Where is the person whose life matters in this poem? And start out there and tell us some kind of story. Another Rose Leonard points out, try relying less on adjectives and adverbs to put the message across. If you want some discussion of adverbs, that was in the last episode, actually. We talked about adjectives and adverbs and how they're subordinate. They don't matter as much in our brains. They don't stick as much to, more Tim throw rock, exactly. They don't stick as much. They're not as essential part of our evolutionary biology as nouns and verbs. And so they just don't matter as much to us. We sort of, if we get a whole list of adjectives, we just want to skip forward and ignore it until we get to the noun. And that's just how our brains work. So, as I say, like Tim throw rock, that's really what matters. It doesn't matter as much if it's a heavy rock or a round rock, the shape of the rock. We don't care. We want to know that I threw a rock at you so you can duck in time. Anyway, and so we say serene embrace, where shadows softly merge, intertwine. Like instead of saying a Twilight's serene embrace, like specifically, how can you describe that? Like, what does it look like? Use metaphor, compare it to something else. Describe it in a way that we haven't seen before. Using adjectives, those are categories of things we've seen before. It's another way to think of adjectives. So you know what color red is. So you say that's a red ball. I know because I'm comparing it to all the other reds. It's this like general thing, this label that we stick on it that it's red. But if we say, it's red like a rose or something, then that's a certain specific red that we get to connect with. So do more of that, less adjectives, more nouns. Anyway, but then tell a story. I guess that's what we just keep saying. But tell us an actual story. Like, who's here? I mean, the poem ends, we find the true essence of peace and boundless possibilities of the soul's journey. Yeah. And Nancy Savanic says, pick a few choice images for more impact. Find a turn. Yeah. Okay. Taylor H. Loss says, I wonder if the lack of spaces between sentences is a choice or typos. That's a consequence of pasting it in. This is if you paste in, make sure that it's pasted properly when you submit. We let submissions be pasted in because some people don't have, it's not as easy to access. A lot of people are submitting now just from their phones. And so we want them to be able to submit easily and not have to worry about files and uploading files. So you let people paste it in, but you got to make sure that it doesn't introduce errors when you paste it in. So there's a few spaces that are dropped. You see that a lot with the pasted in poems. If it's a great poem, who cares? Like, we want to find poems that we will remember tomorrow. and if we do, I don't care if there's as many typos as who cares. But you do want to be make a note of that too. Anyway, is that the only one? Yeah. So let's move on. So tell a story. Give us, a story is the whole plot. There's something that happened, and then there's a reason why you're telling us this. Like, those are the essential things. And there's no subject in the poem, and so we need a subject to be the story has a protagonist. There's no protagonist here. Okay, so let's move on to another poem. And next poet is Faika Chugtai from Pakistan, from Lahore. Okay. Some questions here. I understand that my poem didn't find a place, but could you please tell me if it might have been published under a different category? Well, no. Does it resonate with the spirit and sound pure enough to be heard? And I have one more thing to ask. Whenever I write poetry, I feel so close to it, like tearing up and actually feeling each word. I really, really love it and put great faith in it, but when it gets rejected, I begin to doubt its worth, the way Asian parents doubt the worth of a divorced daughter. Why is it so? Why can't I continue to love it even after it has been rejected? Does it make me a bad parent? Is it normal? Well, rejection for poems is normal. It's part of the process. It's not easy. Poetry really isn't that easy. It's pretty hard to make someone else interested in these little squiggles on the page and what you have to say. It's not something that's easy to do. 80% of poets maybe, or poems, I should say, that we get as submissions just don't really even have a chance at being published because they're, like we've said, they don't tell a story. Already in this episode, we've seen a lot of that. Don't have a handle of the language. All that we're trying to do is make a string of sounds that will come out of a mouth that we'll remember and want to remember for a reason. And, it's not an easy thing to do, but it's magical when you can do it. And so just you have to think about it as part of the growing process. You get better and better. Yeah. So, yeah. So Dick Westheimer says, I think it is wonderful that people from all over the world care enough about poetry to subject it to public critique. Yeah, me too. And Taylor also says, I found workshopping is one of the best ways to get used to criticism of your work. Yeah. Well, in the criticism of your work, that's the thing. The criticism, it's not saying like this is bad or this is good or like, there's certain like rules that you have to follow. It's just, does it work? Does it work to make a thing that's a memorable object that has some kind of meaning that someone else that doesn't know you can read? That's all that we're even talking about. It's not like this is bad. It's not like you're handing in something for a grade and it got a C and you're sad that it got a C on your paper and you wish it got an A. That's not the way at all to think about it. The way at all to think about it is this is a skill. Storytelling, especially storytelling in this way, it's one of maybe the oldest human ambitions. And it takes a lot of practice. And so think about it as practice. I'm working on this. I'm working toward becoming a better writer, better at conveying emotions and feelings through the music of speech. And so, yeah, as Rose says, think of all the feedback as a gift. Think of things being passed on as how can I make the things better? How can I be a better storyteller? How can I make my experience, my feelings, my thoughts in the world be heard and make something that people want to hear? And that's what we're talking about. But yeah, rejections are part of the process. As Sharon Ferrante, who we've published several times, says, I'm waiting for a few rejections right now. It's part of the process. Everybody, George Bill Gare, Denise Duhamel, everybody gets their stuff rejected. Denise Duhamel's book, Kinky, that made her famous, was rejected like 47 times from 47 different publishers before it ended up coming out. Rejection is just part of it because there's a lot of people out there trying to do this. It is like the oldest human art, maybe. I don't know if cave painting predates it. Probably not. We have a drive to do it. Storytelling is really, fundamental to what we are. So there's a lot of people who want to do it, even though there's not a lot of reward, which means just in how, supply and demand, there are a lot more. The supply of poems is a lot bigger than demand. And that makes it for tough competition. So it doesn't make you a bad parent, but that everything should be work more at it. How can I work? How can I be better? Dick Westheimer's batting average, he said, is about 2%. And Dick Westheimer is a great poet. And that means you send out 50 submissions, one time they get picked up. And I sort of wish there was less randomness to it than that. It'd be better if it was like, if it really did mean, my poem's good if it got published and it's not good if it didn't, that would be a lot simpler. But it's a lot more complicated than that even. But don't feel bad about poems, being passed on doesn't mean anything. But you haven't, these aren't like these perfect objects that you've created and are now destroyed or something. Like that's not at all what it is. Anyway, let's take a look at these poems and see what's going on. Here we go. Bones. Bones dogs bark for in the darkness of night, or the bones of beloved and Bukowski's sight. Bones that speak of a leisurely life, teeth that decay thanks to a sugary diet, bones that mark a lingering infection, bones full of secrets, archaeological inflection. But what about the bones of those lovely runners? They bore 308 days from winter to summers, bones of men, women, and kids, bones that fell beyond the human grid, bone bare bone, no muscle, no tone, bones of the bombed, fragmented, pulverized, bones unnamed, untagged, and calcined, bones in conflict with no human rights, bones of survival and famine and fights, bones that had displaced zone after zone, bones with strength none of us had known. Those bones have been bombed in silent prostration. Those bones have been blasted in genocidal occupation. I think of those 100 and their 206 bones without a death census, unmarked, they have gone. My future archaeologist, my hope lies with you. Don't let go of this grave fest, unnoticed by all but few. Okay, and so this back to me, and a huge number of submissions are like this, of being upset and dejected by not having your poems published, and then if you read the poem, bones dogs bark. Like, what does that even mean? Like, bones dogs bark for in darkness of night. Like, that's so cluttery and difficult to even start the poem. And then, or the bones of beloved in Bukowski's sight, bones that speak of a leisurely life, teeth that decay. Like, there's no sense of wanting to work at poetry from a lot of submissions, and that's just the truth of it. If you want your poems read and appreciated by other people, you have to actually work at it. You have to learn things. You have to read poems. You have to read books of poems. You have to read, literary magazines that you want to be in. And I think that's like a prerequisite for wanting to have your voice shared by other people. And so put in the work. That's really the message that you have to take home. Like, actually work at this. Anyway, so read more poetry, read contemporary poetry, read poetry, like find the poems you like, try to make your poems sound more like the poems that you like, figure out why you like the poems that you like. But it starts with actually liking poems and knowing what poems you like. You have to read. And so, so there's that. So what, the question becomes what poems are written in this kind of forced rhyme scheme, that you like? Are there examples of poems that are written like this that you can show us? I'm not sure that there are. But anyway, so the thing with the rhymes, and as people are pointing out, as Sarah Muslim McMahon says, I'd like to see the poet revise this poem and strive to not have these true end rhymes to get past the sing-songy rhythm. And so the poem is really being pushed by the rhyme. It's like being written toward each rhyme. We have these rhyming couplets, and then we're just sort of, you can feel that the poem is going for the first rhyme that you can think of that fits, and then it's like wedged in to come to that rhyme. So bones dogs bark for in the darkness of night, or the bones of beloved in Bukowski's sight. That night sight, like sight is the first thing you think when you're trying to rhyme off night, and we get that through the whole poem. Teeth that decay thanks to a sugary diet, bones that mark a lingering infection, bones full of secrets, archaeological infection. Yeah. Mark Ritter says the word bones here works like the word want in the earlier poem, but this one is longer and less focused, seems to be ramble a bit, which reduces impact. Yeah. And so there's a nice, I'm trying to think of a poem. I guess, it's not a rattle poem. Where? Oh, what's that poem called? Maybe I can't remember. Yeah, so if you're going to have repetition, here's an example. This is Joy Harjo, Poet Laureate of the United States. She had some horses. And feel how, because this poem, the repetition, the variation on the repetition is what makes the poem sing, okay? So she had horses who were bodies of sand, and the uniqueness of that, the surprising nature of that. She had horses who were bodies of sand. She had horses who were maps drawn of blood. She had horses who were skins of ocean water. She had horses who were the blue air of sky. She had horses who were fur and teeth. She had horses who were clay and would break. She had horses who were splintered red cliff. She had some horses. She had horses with long, pointed breasts. She had horses with full brown thighs. She had horses who laughed too much. She had horses who threw rocks at glass houses. She had horses who licked razor blades. She had some horses. She had horses who danced in her mother's arms. She had horses who thought they were the sun and their bodies shone and burned like stars. We won't go on again, or on and on. That's a pretty long poem. But see how the repetition, it has the repetition as like an anchor, and then it pushes in surprising ways off of that. And that's something that you can do in works and poems, but you have to have interesting things. Like it's like the repetition, the regularity of that is a great like solid wall to push against, but you have to be pushing against it in surprising places. And so I wanted to point out that. And so where Bones is here, sometimes we have that, and I think there are some people who pointed out they liking the Bones repetition. It's nice in places where it's working like that. Brandon Sullivan suggests a title like Inventory of Bones might help a bit. That way we know from the beginning to expect a list of them, not necessarily in sentences. Yeah. And it would be a quirky inventory. Yeah. So quirky is the important point. And keeping, keeping patterns and paying attention to the music. So bones that speak of a leisurely life, teeth that decay thanks to a sugary diet. Do you feel that the teeth that decay thanks to a sugary diet, the rhythm and the pacing of that is completely off of the other lines, which you sort of have a nice cadence start to be set up. And the same thing here, bones that mark a lingering infection, bones full of secrets, then archaeological inflection that's really forced to get to the rhyme and doesn't fit the rhythm of it. But what about the bones of these lovely runners? They bore 308 days from winters to summers. How many syllables are crammed into that because you have the number. Bones of men, women, and kids. So right here, this is a nice run. Bones of men, women, and kids. Bones that fell behind the human grid. Bone, bare bone, no muscle, no tone. And then, there's nice sections where we have a little run, and then we break it up, and then we have another little run. That's the way to work it that works really nicely. Yeah. And then we have this transition. Bones of the bombed, fragmented, so bones of the bombed works nice. But the number of syllables are jammed in here, and the tone shifts don't work. We need to stay in that voice, maybe that's what we mean by tone we were talking about before. Yeah. Yeah, so Dick Westheimer says the poet would benefit from listening too closely to where the rhymes want to take her into something that totally surprises her. And yeah, so if you're going to write in rhyme, the rhyme itself should be, don't take the first rhyme you can think of. Like try to find the most surprising, unusual rhyme and see where that leads you instead of, the easy rhymes. And I think that's a real problem when we say rhymes become sing-songy and repetitive. A. Stallings, who's just one of the masters at it, reminds us to, find difficult rhymes, try to find rhymes of words that are multisyllabic rhymes to make it a lot more variable, and rhyme across parts of speech. So have nouns rhyme with verbs. When you end up having the same kind of words that are sort of naturally occurring to you, that's when it starts to feel really sing-songy and not surprising at all, because you're just running toward that easy rhyme. Use rhyme as a tool to push you farther than you would have gone without the rhyme. And that's the way to use rhyme effectively. Let's see. Bones of survival and famine and fights. Bones that had displaced zone after zone. Yeah. So anyway, I think we've talked enough about this. Let's look at the error. And then here another. And this is it short? It's a little longer. Let's see what goes on here. We'll see if we have the rhyme issue. The error. One day I woke up, tapped my Tumblr link, but found a rumbler on black screen's brink. Words in white, like stars at night, said internet's done in plain sight. Evaporated link fell in volcano's sway. Fizzled out, foolish display. So again, we're writing here again. This is a perfect example of writing toward the rhyme. And the process of writing here, you can just see it on the page. I say, words in white, like stars at night. So I'm thinking, I'm going to rhyme sight. And then we write towards sight. And there's no coincidence that night and sight was the rhyme here, because it's like the word game. When I say night, think of the first word you think of, sight, and we're always going to that first word you think of, and that becomes really boring and predictable. And so don't write toward that first rhyme you think of. Write to like the 8th rhyme you think of, or write to the most unusual rhyme you can think of. And one day I woke up, and so there's all the rhymes. We're condensing things. We're running toward the rhyme. And I'd like if there's a poet that you like that writes in this way, I don't know who that might be. You got to read more poetry. Like, take poetry seriously and read A. Stallings, we mentioned, if you want to rhyme. There's a whole community, Rina Espaillat. I mean, there's tons of poets that rhyme that are wonderful, that read their rhyming poems and find poems you love and see what they're doing and write in that way, like write toward that, because they're doing something. You love the poems that you love for a reason. So find poems you actually like reading and then work your style that way. You got to read. Just writing toward rhyme isn't enough to make it poetry. Okay, I'll keep going though. Words in white like stars at night, said internet's done in plain sight. Evaporated link, fell in volcano sway, fizzled out, foolish display. Splat of error, wiggly net, annoying glitches, hard to forget. I turned it to Insta, but it was crying, full of testimonials and lying, soldiers eating loot. Here, there's some interesting places it goes. I turned to Insta, like the personifying of Instagram and the different social media platforms is interesting in this poem, and the characterizations of that is interesting. And so you could see building a poem off of that. Soldiers eating loot, smashing lingerie, no denying. It's for the hostage, I'm simply not buying. Toys bound to tanks like in Mad Max's ride. Innocent civilians fall with each bullet's stride. Brandon Stone says sway display seems a little better than some of the other pairs. A bit less obvious, and one of the words has 2 syllables. Yeah, Professor McJerk says, and I love when poets play with near rhymes too. That's creative and interesting to me. Yeah, look up near rhymes. Things that, crying instead of lying, go like staying or something, where it's a little bit off. Dick Western says, read, yes, and also go to readings of different poets you admire. Zoom has made a gift for me. Listening to good poets read their own work is so, so instructive. Yeah. And again, just if you want to be a poet, read and participate in poetry. You're not going to have anybody care about it unless you love it and love other people's work and appreciate other people's work. And you have to read other people's work and go to other people's readings, hear poetry. So anyway, I think we'll end it there. Yeah, we're 9 minutes past the hour. Well, I guess I'll read the end of the poem. Toys of kids who don't smell of milk or poop, but of death in this hunger coup. War of flower massacre, hunger-stricken kids, new century's Holocaust lost in its grids. Then comes Aaron Bushnell. Who is Aaron Bushnell? That name sounds familiar, I don't remember. Speaking loud and clear, no longer complicit in genocidal fare. So clear and fair are nice slant rhymes. Like we were talking about before. Extreme protest reaching skies while we rest. And again, don't drop the articles. Use natural speech. Use the, use a, use an, use of. Don't clip your sentences short, because those articles are a part of speech. I read that poem again by Rina, where she talks about it, but you can find that poem by Rina Espaillat, or she says you got to include those. But don't shorten sentences. There's a reason why those function words are there. They perform a function. That's why they're called function words, and they let the music flow out. So okay. Then Aaron Bushnell, speaking loud and clear, no longer complicit in genocidal fare, extreme protest reaching skies while we rest. Free Palestine, he shouts till his last breath. Well, we're going to end there, because it's the same. It's just pushed through the rhyme. Wendy Vitalock is a great poet. Let's here, hang on a second. Let me see. A Wendy Vitalock poem. I mean, we had, the most recent one, the way it goes is so short. I don't want to share. I got to close the shutters too. Yeah, so this is the most recent by Wendy from Rattle. Driving by our old home on Mayfair. This is the way it goes. Driving by our old home on Mayfair, the cairn was gone, the tire swing still floating there. So you have that one rhyme, and then the home gone, near rhyme. So and it's a very short poem. But look at a longer poem by Wendy, and I'm sure the suggested ones will be. Do The Night Relies. Here we go. The Night Relies. And feel how the rhyme works in this poem. Beware the ones who fear the night. We ghosts, Athena, Allah, Christ, will take our place in the dark and fuse the Father, the Mother, the Mountain, the Muse. So see how, we weren't expecting the rhyme to come so close right there. And so she's varying it a lot. In sleep, we have no face to lose. What's left is vague and sways the morning. The camouflage is inconforming. By noon we choose another word, another myth, a lighter bird. Between the train and bustling station, the human side of this equation, when bathed by day or when in dream, you are not you, nor who you seem. The sum of what you think you've heard will galvanize and will insist a life will change inside the turn. The night relies on what you've kissed, the womb, the moon, the dream, the myth, the rain, the dusk, the rising mist. So here, all the enjambment, as Rose Leonard just said, all the ways that the rhymes don't end the sentence, all the internal rhymes, we go from mist, we have myth, kissed, myth, mist, which all are sort of slight different variations on rhyme with each other, and insist to, turn and heard, turn and heard, they're very different sounds, but there's that rhyme close to them. We have a lot of just changing and variation and surprise there, so it's really fun to read. It sounds beautiful, as Hemant Malik just said, and that's with that playfulness. That's where you want to look to. Find poets that you like to read. If you like rhyme, find rhyming poets, and then and figure out what they're doing. So yeah. Okay, well, that's going to wrap up the critique of the week. Thanks, everybody, for being here in our new office. Got some settings to adjust. I got to make sure I close the blinds because I'm going to be blind if I don't. And but it's really nice to be here, and thanks for finding us after the week off. Hope you had a happy holiday, everybody who joined. It's been fun talking to you, as it always is, and sharing all these poems. Now, this week's guest coming up on the Rattlecast is going to be Rex Wilder. And Rex Wilder is a wonderful poet through he's a really interesting life too, publishing through Redhead Press in the past. This new book won a prize from, I can't remember which press now off the top of my head, but Rare Fuel is his new book about a mental breakdown and a time in a mental health institution. Really interesting topic, one of those really important topics to be open and discuss, because it happens and it's one of those taboos we don't talk about, so it's a surprise if it happens to you. And it's one of the most, one of the important things to be writing poems about. And a really fascinating and insightful journey in Rare Fuel by Rex Wilder. That's the guest this week. The prompt for this week, and you have 2 weeks to write. You had 2 weeks to write this poem. Of course, I haven't yet. I tend to write them right before. The prompt for this week was to write a poem that includes a wish for the new year and features a sound you've never written in a poem before. That's your prompt for this week. Write a poem that includes a wish for the new year and features a sound you've never written in a poem before. So you've had, 10 days or 11, I don't know how many days, 15 days, 12 days, whatever is the math. But you have some time if you haven't written it yet, but you still have time if you haven't. So include that poem for the prompt lines. Rex Wilder is our guest. The regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, this Sunday, December 29th, right here on YouTube. See you then. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.